Pentagon officials arrived in Kyiv and presented Zelensky with 28 points of a so-called plan to end the war. After meeting with the American delegation, Zelensky gathered the servant of the people faction. Dictator Putin also made a statement. What exactly does the document entail? How are Ukraine and Europe responding? What security guarantees are being discussed? And most importantly, will this document become the foundation for peace or for Ukraine's capitulation? Find out all about this next. You're watching TSN.ua news. I'm Alina Turishin. Subscribe to our channel and give us a like. And now let's get started. A U.S. military delegation led by Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll on Thursday, November 20th, presented a new draft proposal for ending the war in Ukraine. The media have published all 28 points of the so-called Donald Trump peace plan. The document was published by the American outlet Axios. Among the stated provisions, this includes the creation of a comprehensive non-aggression agreement between Ukraine, Russia, and the European Union. All political disputes that have arisen between the parties over the past 30 years are proposed to be considered resolved. According to the document, Ukraine must enshrine its non-aligned status and officially renounce its aspiration to join NATO. It is also stipulated that the alliance will not deploy its troops on Ukrainian territory. A separate point of the plan sets the maximum number of Ukraine's armed forces at 600,000 service members. As for the territories, the temporarily occupied Crimea, as well as the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, including those areas currently under Ukrainian control, are recognized de facto as Russian. The territories of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions are proposed to be divided between Ukraine and Russia along the current front line. Russia must renounce its claims to other Ukrainian territories that it temporarily controls. Both sides commit not to change the established borders by force. The status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is to be resolved by putting it into operation under the supervision of the IAEA, with the generated electricity to be divided equally between Ukraine and Russia, 50-50. The economic section provides for the financing of Ukraine's reconstruction by international partners. In particular, it refers to the use of $100 billion in frozen Russian assets. At the same time, the document provides for the gradual lifting of international sanctions on Russia, Russia's return to the G8 format, as well as the establishment of long-term economic cooperation between the US and Russia. The plan also sets out security guarantees for Ukraine. In the event of a new Russian invasion, all sanctions against it must be automatically reinstated and the recognition of any new territories revoked. The humanitarian section proposes the introduction of EU rules on religious tolerance and the protection of linguistic minorities. In addition, both sides must abolish all discriminatory measures and guarantee the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media and educational institutions. Any ideologies that could be interpreted as neo-Nazi are proposed to be banned. After the agreement is signed, an immediate ceasefire must take place. A prisoner exchange in the format of all for all is envisaged. To monitor the implementation of the agreements, a special peace council is being established under the leadership of Donald Trump. Elections in Ukraine are to be held within 100 days after the agreement is signed. Full amnesty is proposed for all participants in the war. The publication Axios also reports that there is a separate project regarding security guarantees for Ukraine. As part of the American initiative to end the war in Ukraine, a separate draft framework agreement on security guarantees is reportedly being prepared, which is referred to as an analog of NATO's Article 5 for Ukraine. According to the draft, a significant, deliberate, and prolonged incursion by Russia across the agreed ceasefire line would be considered an attack on the transatlantic community. And the President of the United States, after consulting with Ukraine, NATO, and European partners, will decide on measures ranging from the use of the armed forces to providing intelligence, logistical, economic, or diplomatic assistance. Within the framework of the document, NATO countries, including France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, and Finland, recognize that Ukraine's security is inseparable from the stability of Europe and commit, together with the United States, to respond to any qualified violation. The agreement enters into force upon signing, is valid for 10 years with the possibility of extension, and compliance will be monitored by a joint monitoring commission led by European partners with the participation of the United States. Meanwhile, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt stated that in their new peace plan, the United States tried to ensure that both sides would benefit. According to her, the administration believes that any agreement must provide full security guarantees for Ukraine. for Europe and Russia to ensure an end to this war, in addition to providing financial resources for Ukraine's reconstruction and for Russia, a return to the global economy. The Office of the President of Ukraine has officially confirmed that it received a plan from the Americans, which the United States considers a chance to unlock diplomacy. In his evening address on November 20th, President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about a meeting with representatives of the United States.
The American side presented their proposals, the points of the plan, their vision for ending the war. From the very first days of the war, we have maintained an extremely simple position. Ukraine needs peace, a real peace that will not be shattered by a third invasion. A just peace, with conditions that respect our independence, our sovereignty, and the dignity of the Ukrainian people. And it is precisely these conditions that we must secure. I outlined what is fundamental for us, and we agreed that our teams will work on these proposals, so that it will be genuine. We will not make any abrupt statements, and are committed to clear, honest work. In
the statement by the Ukrainian delegation at the UN, the red lines were voiced: our land is not for sale, and a refusal to accept decisions that would legalize Russian aggression. This is perceived as a signal that options involving official recognition of territorial losses are unacceptable for Kyiv. On the evening of November 20th, President Zelensky held a meeting with the faction, which lasted about 2 hours. The meeting was held behind closed doors, and deputies were forced to hand over their phones at the entrance. According to media reports, the president noted that difficult negotiations are ongoing regarding the American plan for resolving the war. According to him, the coming week will be important and challenging in the dialogue with the United States. Thank you. At the same time, he emphasized that there will be no concessions on national interests, and European partners will continue to provide Ukraine with financial and military support. The acting U.S. chargé d'affaires in Ukraine, Julie Davis, stated that there has been a significant acceleration in the negotiation process regarding a peaceful settlement between Ukraine and Russia. According to European Pravda, she shared this information during a meeting with journalists in Kyiv. Davis emphasized that President Donald Trump has sought to end the war from the very beginning, and now the United States is moving toward this goal with noticeable enthusiasm. According to her, there has been an extremely intense diplomatic activity in just the last 36 hours, one of the most ambitious she has witnessed in her 30 years of diplomatic service. She also reported that together with U.S. Army Secretary James Driscoll, she met with Ukrainian officials. During these negotiations, the parties discussed an aggressive schedule of efforts aimed at achieving peace. According to the Financial Times, the U.S. has established a very strict timetable for advancing the American peace plan. The White House expects that by November 27th, Thanksgiving Day in the U.S., Ukraine will have preliminarily determined its position regarding the framework agreement. By the end of November, this document is to be handed over to Russia for review, and at the beginning of December, a political decision should be reached regarding the main parameters of the agreement. The same sources say that the Ukrainian side is feeling intense pressure due to the situation at the front and missile strikes on the energy sector, but considers territorial concessions and downsizing the army unacceptable to society. According to several American media outlets, the plan was developed by the Trump administration with the participation of Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff and Russian negotiator Kirill Dmitriev. On November 20th, the White House confirmed that Witkoff and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had been quietly working on the plan over the past month. They communicated with both sides, Russia and Ukraine, to understand what each country was willing to do to achieve a lasting and stable peace. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and certain officials described the emergence of Trump's plan, which was leaked to the media, as an information operation and a factory of unrealistic proposals that largely repeat Putin's demands. A number of Ukrainian politicians and experts publicly called the plan absurd and say it amounts to de facto capitulation. In particular, because it would legalize Russian seizures, grant amnesty for war crimes, lift sanctions, and return the Russian Federation to the club of major powers. According to the Washington Post, Ukraine's European partners emphasized the need to be involved in shaping proposals regarding the security of Ukraine and Europe. At the same time, they stated that they had not been made aware of the published plan. In response, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot noted that Europeans seek a just peace that respects the sovereignty of every state and cannot be undermined in the future by aggression. He also emphasized that this peace must not be a capitulation and that Ukraine's capitulation cannot be allowed. The European Union is preparing its own plan to end the war, which is considered to be more advantageous for Ukraine, reports Zavolos Trijonov. European leaders intend to agree on this document in the coming days and are seeking to persuade Kyiv to support their initiative first and foremost, rather than the American plan. At the same time, Brussels believes that the 28-point document proposed by the Americans essentially amounts to capitulation for Ukraine. And according to Politico, the European Union is sharply criticizing the new American peace plan for Ukraine. In Brussels, it is essentially being called a list of concessions to Putin and a document that cannot be acceptable for Ukraine. European diplomats are dismayed that the US proposed initiative is extremely weak and does not take into account Kyiv's key interests. The publications also note that there is a growing awareness within the EU that even promises to fund military support for Ukraine did not guarantee them a real seat at the negotiating table where the future security architecture of Europe is being shaped. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that Britain has already determined which military units and headquarters it will send to Ukraine in the event of a peace agreement. These plans are being developed within a coalition of 30 countries led by the United Kingdom and France, which supports Ukraine in the process of a possible peaceful settlement. However, Russia is categorically opposed to any participation of European and especially NATO or multinational military contingents on the territory of Ukraine. The very idea of deploying contingents from Europe is considered unacceptable by Moscow. In September 2025, Putin once again reiterated that any foreign troops stationed in Ukraine would become a legitimate target. Therefore, it still remains unclear whether the European Union will actually send any troops or military contingents to Ukraine. If so, in what numbers and under which jurisdiction? Political analyst Volodymyr Fesenko considers the so-called US peace plan of 28 points to be unpromising in its current form, as it is unacceptable for Ukraine. In his opinion, Kyiv's agreement to participate in negotiations around this document does not mean agreement to its terms. This is rather a diplomatic tactic aimed at minimizing the risks contained in this plan. Whether such a tactic will work remains an open question. The expert notes that the statement about an aggressive timeline for advancing the document is an element of psychological pressure on Ukraine. Moreover, the implementation of certain provisions and the proposed plan is impossible without the consent of European partners. That is why Fesenko emphasizes it is important in the near future to form a united and sufficiently firm EU opposition to these proposals. The Kremlin's reaction is telling. In Moscow, the response to the announcement of the proposed 28-point peace plan was both restrained and demonstrative at the same time. On November 20th, Putin visited the command center of the troops of the Western Military District in military uniform, where he reaffirmed the Kremlin's determination to continue the war against Ukraine and to achieve all the objectives of the so-called special military operation unconditionally. In this context, Valery Gerasimov reported on the alleged liberation. The city of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, where, according to Putin, up to 15 battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine have been blocked. In addition, Putin once again called the president of Ukraine illegitimate. At the same time, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that Moscow has no new information regarding the Ukrainian side's consent to negotiate with Russia. And what do you think about the 28 points of the so-called peace plan that was published by several media outlets? Write to us in the comments. We are interested to hear your opinion. Stay with TSN to keep up with the most important news. Take care of yourselves and see you in the next episodes.